Son of the Storm Dragon, by Ashton K. 423. Ren Daisuke thought my unconventional life would end after years of working in special forces and CIA. So imagine my surprise when I died and reincarnated as a dragon of all things in this world, filled with magic and monsters. This is the story of my adventures in the greatest journey of all time, under the new name Rimuru Tempest, Tensura AU. Chapter 29, 3 Demon Lords and the Labyrinth. The ground beneath their feet gave way as soon as their blades clashed, spiderweb cracks spreading out in a 10-meter radius from the heavy impact. Dust and debris swirled violently around the two figures, locked in a deadly stalemate of steel and sparks. Rimuru held his katana firmly with both hands, his arms trembling slightly under the immense pressure of Dino's greatsword. The massive blade was just inches from his face, and slowly inching closer. The fallen angel's eyes were devoid of their usual lethargy, burning with a cold, sharp killing intent that felt like a bucket of ice-cold water running down Rimuru's spine. "You blocked it," Dino muttered, his tone mildly surprised but not concerned. It was as though the conclusion had already been reached and resistance was futile. Which wasn't that far from the truth. Just by clashing swords with him, Rimuru knew this guy was leagues above him. That being said, Rimuru didn't appreciate the casual dismissal in his tone. "Your reaction speed is certainly impressive for a fraud. You know, I'm really getting tired of people trying to kill me before they even say hello," Rimuru retorted through gritted teeth, his arms straining slightly as he pushed back against the fallen angel's immense strength. "You must have woken up on the wrong side of the bed this morning. Don't you know it's bad manners to attack strangers?" "Manners?" Dino scoffed as he pressed down harder, a dark aura surrounding his form. Rimuru groaned under the increased pressure. "Who are you to lecture me about manners? Coming here with that face? That aura? You dare to mock the memory of the divine? Then you can pay for that sin with your life." As Dino pressed harder, Rimuru pulled back, sensing the danger of continuing that stalemate. Without anything blocking it, Dino's greatsword continued on its path and crashed into the stone ground, the impact sending another plume of dust and stone shards into the air. Rimuru used the momentary cover to leap backward, putting several meters of distance between them. He took a swift moment to assess his surroundings. Shuna, Cheyenne, and the others had all cleared the immediate area as soon as the conflict started, the feast that had been laid out ruined beyond recognition by the initial skirmish. It honestly pissed Rimuru off. They were having a good time, and then this guy just had to ruin it for everyone. But still, this was a demon lord, and they were guests within Malim's domain. He would rather avoid fighting here. "Okay, look," Rimuru said, raising a hand in a placating gesture, though his other hand kept a firm grip on his katana. "I have literally zero clue what you're talking about. What face? What divine memory? Can we maybe take a 5-minute timeout to explain why you want me dead before we resume the whole murder attempt?" Dino straightened up, effortlessly pulling his massive sword from the crater he'd just created. He looked at Rimuru with a gaze that was both bored and intensely focused. "Playing dumb? Or maybe you truly are just an ignorant imposter. Doesn't matter. The result will be the same." He vanished. Rimuru immediately ducked his head, his movements guided by ultra instinct. The air above him screeched as Dino's sword bladed through the space his head had been occupying a fraction of a second ago. The slightest of delays and he would have lost his head. "Seriously?" Rimuru shouted as he rolled to the side and then leapt away to make some distance. Rimuru then fired numerous laser arrows from his free hand. The dark, condensed beams of chaotic energy streaked towards the fallen angel, homing in on his person. Dino didn't even flinch. He simply twirled his blade lazily before charging forward. Each laser was deflected by his blade as he continued rushing ahead, sending them off into the surrounding mountains with a series of deafening explosions. In an instant, Dino was upon him again. The distance closed in a heartbeat. His greatsword swung horizontally, a strike meant to cleave Rimuru in two. Clang! Rimuru barely managed to bring his katana up in time, reinforcing the block with his dragon aura and battle will. The impact sent a jolt of numbness racing up his arms, his boots skidding backward across the stone plaza, carving deep grooves into the ground. The onslaught continued, and Rimuru could only continue to evade or deflect. Dino never left an opening to attack, nor was Great Sage able to find one. The gap between them was just too big. Experience and power. Dino clearly had it all. So, the only thing Rimuru could do in this situation was not die. Dino, cut it out. Boom. Before either Dino or Rimuru could process it, a small fist connected with Dino's cheek with the force of a meteor impact. The fallen angel was launched sideways, crashing through 3 stone pillars and embedding himself deep into the cliffside wall of the valley. Rubble rained down, burying him instantly. Malim landed where Dino had just been standing, her fists clenched and her expression uncharacteristically furious. "What do you think you're doing?" Malim shouted at the pile of rubble. "Rimuru is my guest, and he's my family. If you touch him again, I'll blow you away for real." After a moment, the pile of rubble shifted, and Dino's hand lazily popped out, pushing a large boulder aside. He sat up, dusting off his shoulder with a pained grimace, though he looked remarkably unharmed for someone who had just been punched by Malim Nava. He had only a bruise on his cheek to show for it, and even that was quickly healing. "Ow! Malim, what the hell?" Dino groaned, his voice slipping back into its usual drawl. He rubbed his cheek, before looking at Malim with an irritated and betrayed expression. "That actually hurt. Why are you defending this imposter? I'm doing this for your sake, you know. Can't you see it? That thing. It's imitating him." "Him? Are you still half asleep, Dino?" Malim asked, her fury momentarily giving way to confusion and curiosity. She was still pretty upset, though. "Because if you are, my fist can wake you right up." Dino let out a long and weary sigh that seemed to carry the weight of centuries. He opened his mouth to speak before he remembered something. Malim had no recollection of her father. She had been young when her father died, and his image had long since begun to fade from her memory. Then there was Ramiris. Her current condition had her going through cycles of reincarnations, with her memory being reset every time she died and came back. It was no wonder neither of them recognized Rimuru's appearance for what it was. But Dino knew. He remembered the face of his master and creator, the Star King Veldanava. And to see a similar face on some random Majin felt like a sacrilege of the highest order. "Forget it, you wouldn't understand," Dino said with a weary sigh. "It would be pointless to bring it up now." "No way," Malim fumed. "You just ruined our lunch and tried to kill my cousin. I demand an explanation." "Cousin?" Dino repeated, his own expression becoming slightly confused. "Yes, cousin," Malim shouted in annoyance. "Rimuru is Velridia's son, and my cousin, so you better treat him with some respect, Dino, or else I'll kick you out of my domain for good." Dino blinked once, then twice. "Velridia's son?" He looked from Malim to Rimuru, who was sheathing his katana with a wary expression, then back to Malim. "As in Velridia, the storm dragon?" "Yes, you idiot. That's what I've been saying," Malim shouted in exasperation. "Is there any other Velridia that we know of?" Dino turned towards Rimuru once more, this time his gaze less hostile and more contemplative and confused. He slowly stood up, brushing more dust and debris off his cloak. "Velridia's son, huh? That would certainly explain it. If you're of that lineage," he muttered to himself as he scratched the back of his head. Looking at Rimuru, the resemblance between him and his old master, the Star King Dragon Veldanava, was uncanny. Rimuru's form seemed like a younger version of Veldanava's own human form. But if he was of true dragon lineage, then there was bound to be some resemblance. "Man, I really messed up this time, didn't I?" Whatever remained of his oppressive aura seemed to vanish in that moment. His stern expression disappeared as he slumped forward, his posture returning to its habitual slouch. He scratched the back of his head awkwardly. "My bad. My bad," Ramiris shouted as she flew up from behind the hidden crowd of locals and guests, now that the actual conflict seemed to be over. She flew right into Dino's face and grabbed onto his nose. You wake up, eat our food, and suddenly attack and try to kill Rimuru out of nowhere, destroying all the delicious food in the process, and all you have to say for that is my bad? How about giving a proper apology for once? You lazy bum. Yeah, Dino. I finally managed to convince Midray to change his stance on cooking and bring delicious food here to my domain. Only for you to trash our meal. Malim said in annoyance, her own aura flaring slightly. I'd also like a few answers myself. I'm pretty sure this is our first time meeting, so I'd like to know why you attacked me so suddenly. Rimuru inquired, focusing on the dialogue Dino said during the fight. You mentioned my face. Do I look like someone who offended you in the past or something? It's actually the opposite. You look like someone I held the utmost respect and loyalty to, so much so it felt like you were mocking him with your resemblance. To be specific, you look like Veldanava, the Star Dragon King and my former master, Dino explained, drawing looks of surprise from not only Rimuru, but also Malim, Ramiris, and the various onlookers. But I guess since you're Velredia's kid, there was bound to be at least some resemblance given that he's technically your uncle. Rimuru looks like my dad? Malim said while looking at her cousin in wonder. She approached Rimuru and took his face into both of her hands, inspecting him more closely. After a moment of squishing his cheeks together and turning him to the side, ignoring Rimuru's protests, she turned back towards Dino. I don't see it, Malim said plainly. Of course you don't, Dino sighed, rubbing the back of his neck as he looked at the petite demon lord. You were pretty young when, you know? So let me get this straight, Rimuru said, his voice flat. You tried to kill me because I look like my uncle? That's your defense. It's a pretty good defense, honestly, Dino shrugged, looking entirely unapologetic. Veldanava was, well, he was everything to us. Seeing someone where his image is jarring. Rimuru let out a long sigh as the tension finally left his body. He didn't think Dino would try anything else at this point. But that didn't mean he wasn't annoyed at having almost lost his life because of something so mundane. I didn't choose this face, you know? It's just how I ended up looking after taking human form. You don't say. Well, I never imagined Velredia to be the type to have children, Dino said as he stretched. As far as I know, she's always been the wild and destructive type. Who's the father? I don't know, Rimuru replied honestly, before looking at Dino with a deadpan expression. And frankly, after seeing how you react to family reunions, I'm not sure I want to find out. Fair enough. Dino shrugged, his massive blade dissolving into motes of light as he dismissed it. I wouldn't want to meet the guy who managed to tame Velredia either. Sounds like a real piece of work. Anyways, I'm sorry for attacking like that. Hope we're cool, Dino said as he stretched his hand out towards Rimuru. Rimuru looked at the hand for a moment. In all honesty, he had a lot more questions for Dino, especially in regards to Veldanava. Nothing good would come from further conflict, so Rimuru accepted the outstretched hand with his own. Yeah, we're fine, I guess. Awesome. Now about that feast. Any chance you could make seconds? Dino asked, causing Rimuru to deadpan once more. I'm starting to think that all demon lords have at least some weird gimmick going on. Or maybe I'm just unlucky to have met the weird ones thus far, Rimuru pondered, before responding with a sigh. I'm sure we could work something out. Not so fast, you lazy bum. If you're truly sorry, you can help us in cleaning up your mess while Rimuru's followers get settled in here to teach how to cook to the dragon faithful. Ramiris called out to Dino, not letting him completely off the hook. Even she wasn't lazy or ungrateful enough to do something like this and not at least try to help with the aftermath to show her sincerity. Cleaning and working aren't really my thing, Dino replied in his typical lazy manner, only for Malim to smack him on the head. Well, too bad, Dino. You ruined our meal and tried to kill my cousin while being a guest in my domain. So it's the least you can do, Malim said in a surprisingly scolding manner. Rimuru felt like calling her out on all the property damage she had done in his domain, but decided to keep his lips shut since she was standing up for him. The next morning came by faster than anyone expected. Another celebratory feast had been prepared for the prior night, this time larger and much more grand than the rush job of the afternoon meal. The night was spent celebrating the new alliance and establishing the bonds between the Dragon Faithful and the Tempestians. When morning finally came, Rimuru, Melim, and Ramiris were preparing to take off and return to Tempest. As planned, Shuna, Cheyenne, Ariel, and the rest of the delegation would be staying behind as honored guests of Melim to teach the Dragon Faithful how to cook and expand their horizons. Ideally, they would establish even deeper bonds in that time, and the Tempestians could even learn a thing or two from the Dragon Faithful. It would be a cultural exchange of sorts, even if not explicitly stated. Though at the current moment, Rimuru was dealing with a different kind of situation. "So let me get this straight," Rimuru said, rubbing his temples as he looked at Dino slouching against a stone pillar, the morning sun shining brightly over the city. "You want to come with us? To Tempest?" "Yeah," Dino yawned, scratching his stomach. "I mean, think about it. Ramiris is going, Melim is going, and I'm a demon lord too. Having 3 demon lords is bound to be a strong deterrent. Plus, you're building a nation, right? Meaning you need people. I'm a person. Sort of. You're a freeloader, is what you are." Ramiris shot back, crossing her tiny arms. "At least Melim and I have legit reasons for staying in Tempest, since we're both helping Rimuru in the process. You just want to mooch off Rimuru's hospitality because you heard about the soft beds and the amazing food. I mean, yeah? Is that a crime?" Dino asked shamelessly, looking at Rimuru with a deadpan expression. "I mean, come on. After that feast last night, can you blame me? Good food and a soft bed? Who'd pass up something like that? Even a guy like me has standards." "Your standards involve sleeping 20 hours a day," Ramiris pointed out as she sat cross-legged on Rimuru's shoulder. "Exactly, and I need high-quality fuel and a good napping spot to maintain that kind of schedule," Dino countered with logic that only made sense to him. He then turned towards Rimuru with half-lidded eyes. "Besides, with Melim gone, Midray might try to make me exercise along with the other Dragon Faithful," he added with a shudder at the mere thought. Rimuru turned to look at Midray. The head priest stood nearby, arms crossed, looking stoic. However, at the mention of Dino leaving, Rimuru swore he saw a flash of relief cross the dragonet's face. "Lord Dino is a difficult guest to accommodate," Midray admitted as politely as possible, not wanting to offend the demon lord in question. "Our way of life does not seem to suit his unique constitution. See? He doesn't want me here," Dino said, gesturing lazily at the priest. "So can I crash at your place for a bit? I promise I won't do anything. Literally. I will do nothing." "Fine," Rimuru said with a resigned sigh. Establishing relations with another demon lord would only benefit him more in the long run, and Dino was the only person he knew that could tell him about Veldanava, his uncle. "But if you're staying with me, you won't be doing nothing," Rimuru said firmly as he crossed his arms. "We don't do freeloading in Tempest. My nation works on a strict policy. Those who do not work do not eat. Melim and Ramiris are each helping in their own way, so you have to find a way to contribute." "Work?" Dino looked physically pained by the word, looking as if Rimuru had asked him to carry the very mountain they were standing on. "Ugh. You're sounding like DeGruel. Dino, you should contribute more. Dino, stop sleeping in the hallway. Dino, get out of my house." "Aha! So you were kicked out. Serves you right. You never do anything to help anyone," Ramiris shouted as she pointed an accusatory finger at the fallen angel. "You're just a burden on society. A leech. A parasite. That's a bit harsh, don't you think?" Dino asked, taking slight offense. "Besides, it was more of a mutual separation. Call it whatever you want, but either you earn your keep in Tempest, or you eat raw vegetables and do workouts with the Dragon Faithful. All in all, I think good food and a warm bed are worth the effort. Right?" Rimuru asked with a raised eyebrow and a small smirk. "Ugh, fine," Dino groaned, his shoulders slumping as though the weight of the world had been placed upon him. "I'll work, but nothing that involves heavy lifting, or running, or standing too long for that matter." "I'm sure we can find something," Rimuru said with a shake of his head. These demon lords would be the death of him one way or another. Wahahaha. Try not to look so down, Dino. Malim laughed as she hovered upright next to the fallen angel. Once you see Rimuru's nation, even a lazy bones like you will want to work just to enjoy the stuff there. Rimuru turned away from the three demon lords as Ramiris and Malim began to tell Dino about all the fun and good stuff in his country. He made his way towards Shuna, who was flanked by Cheyenne and Ariel, a few guards standing not too far off. The rest of the delegation was already getting settled within the Temple of the Dragon Faithful. Rimuru walked up to Shuna, and despite the audience, took her hands in his own. Will you be all right here? He asked quietly. There's no need to worry, Rimuru, Shuna said with a reassuring smile, before turning her gaze towards the eccentric demon lords with an amused expression. If anything, it seems you have more on your plate than I do. Tell me about it, Rimuru scoffed before meeting her gaze. Still, don't push yourself too hard. And if anything happens, just reach out through thought communication, and I'll be here in an instant. I know, she whispered. Then, leaning closer, she pressed a soft kiss to his cheek before pulling back with a bright smile. Safe travels. Please try to keep the city standing until I come back. Don't joke about that, Rimuru replied, though his heart fluttered slightly at the affection. He then stepped back and nodded towards Cheyenne and Ariel. I'm counting on both of you to keep everybody safe. And Cheyenne, remember what we talked about. Diplomacy first. Yes, Lord Rimuru. Cheyenne saluted sharply, her expression serious. I shall protect Lady Shuna and the others with my life. And I will show these dragon faithful the true elegance of Tempest's culinary arts. Rimuru flinched slightly. Right, I forgot she's technically part of the cooking team too. Just maybe stick to guarding Shuna, okay? Let the chefs handle the kitchen, Rimuru advised, hoping to prevent a potential disaster. Cheyenne had drastically improved from the first time she made him a dish. And while their lessons weren't as frequent, due to Rimuru's responsibilities, they did still have them on occasion. That being said, she was far from ready to teach anyone how to cook. Understood. I will guard the kitchen with my life. Close enough. With another nod towards Shuna, who returned it in kind, Rimuru turned away from the three of them and walked towards the demon lords. Malim was bouncing eagerly on the balls of her feet. Dino was leaning against the pillar as he had when Rimuru left, and Ramiris was hovering around him trying to get him to listen, much to Dino's annoyance. All right, are we ready to head out? Rimuru asked as he approached them. It's about time, Ramiris cheered as she flew from Dino and made herself comfortable on Rimuru's shoulder, a habit that was becoming familiar. I thought you were going to stare at each other all day. Come on. I've got a labyrinth to build, and I can't wait to see just how strong you really are. Seeing you hold your own against Dino yesterday got me all kinds of fired up, Malim said with sparkling eyes. Despite her words, Rimuru was of a different opinion. He knew that if Malim hadn't intervened, or if Dino had gotten serious, he wouldn't have lasted much longer. Dino was not only powerful, but a seasoned warrior. All right, hold your horses, Rimuru said, amused by Ramiris's infectious energy and Malim's excitement. With the farewells concluded, Rimuru gathered the demon lords close to him. It was a strange image. Ramiris seated on his shoulder with her feet swinging, Malim latching onto his right arm with a bright smile, giggling, and Dino lazily placing a hand on his left shoulder as if using Rimuru like a leaning post. All right, Sage, take us home. Understood. Activating spatial movement. Location, Rimuru City. Initiating transfer. The ground beneath them began to glow as a magic circle formed. In a blinding pillar of light, the four of them vanished from the city of the Forgotten Dragons. Soon, the light began to fade and disperse into motes of light, revealing the bustling central plaza of Rimuru City. The sudden arrival of their leader caused the nearby citizens to pause in their daily tasks and turn towards the four of them. Rimuru stepped forward, out of the fading light, adjusting his coat with practiced calm. We're back, Rimuru announced, mostly to himself, before turning back to the three demon lords. "Welcome to Rimuru City, capital of the Rimuru Tempest Federation." "Whoa," Dino said as he removed his hand from Rimuru and began to inspect his surroundings. "You guys actually built all of this? And in what, 5 months?" Dino asked as his eyes scanned the paved streets, the orderly structure of houses, the complex water systems, and the way the monsters in general seemed to be going about their daily lives. "We aim to impress here in Tempest," Rimuru said as he stepped up beside Dino. "My goal is to create a nation in which people can live comfortably, and one that is welcoming of all races. We still have a ways to go before we get there, though." It's certainly different," Dino admitted. "It's certainly better than DeGruel's place, that's for sure. And more green, too. That place is a barren wasteland." "I'll take that as a compliment then," Rimuru said, before gesturing for the group to follow him towards the admin building. "Now come on. Let's get you settled in and then we can find you something to do. I'm still trying to figure out how I'm going to explain returning with yet another demon lord." Rimuru muttered the last part, though Ramiris, who was seated on his shoulder, heard him clearly. "At this rate, you might end up befriending all the 10 great demon lords," Ramiris said with a laugh. "Maybe, though there are some who I doubt I can befriend, for one reason or another," Rimuru muttered as his expression became cold and neutral. The first two to come to mind were obviously Leon Cromwell and Clayman. There were too many unsettled issues between Rimuru and those two for there to be any reconciliation at the moment, if ever. "Lord Rimuru," the booming voice of Rigard cut through the murmurs of the civilian population, as the large goblin king rushed forward, stopping just short of the group and dropping onto his knees. "My lord, I am glad to see that you've returned to us safely. We were beginning to worry when night fell without a word from you. Did the delegation go well?" "That's right, Rimuru, Malim, and Ramiris were supposed to return the day before after dropping off Shuna and the others. But after the encounter with Dino, the plans had changed slightly, and as a result, they ended up staying the night in the city of the Forgotten Dragons. In all the excitement from the encounter with Dino, Rimuru had forgotten to notify Rigard and the others that he would be returning the following morning. "Right, sorry, Rigard. There was a minor situation that delayed our departure, so we decided to leave this morning. But everything worked out fine," Rimuru added before questions could be asked. He didn't think telling anyone that Dino had tried to chop off his head would help anyone right now. "Shuna and the others have stayed behind to teach the Dragon Faithful as promised. They'll also be solidifying our relations with them while there." "Oh, as expected of Lord Rimuru and Lady Shuna. A complete success," Rigard bellowed as he flexed his muscles in celebration. "To think our culture is already spreading to the domains of demon lords." "Indeed." The voice of Benimaru suddenly entered the conversation, he and Sui having followed behind Rigard when they sensed Rimuru's return. "Such a feat would not have been imaginable for a fledgling nation such as ours. But with Lord Rimuru, it seems nothing is impossible," Benimaru added with a smirk. "Benimaru, don't encourage him," Rimuru said with an exasperated sigh. He then gestured towards Dino. "Speaking of demon lords, well, I brought another one. This is Dino." "Yo!" Dino raised a hand in a lazy greeting. "My name is Dino, and I'm one of the 10 great demon lords. Sleeping ruler and all that stuff." Dino finished his introduction, his voice trailing off as his eyes began to droop again. He leaned against his greatsword, which he materialized just to use as a prop to keep himself upright. The silence that followed was palpable. Rigard, Sui, and Benimaru stared at the slouching figure of the sleeping ruler with expressions ranging from disbelief to carefully veiled apprehension. If their lord said this carefree and lazy-looking individual was a demon lord, then they would not question it. But still, it made for a rather bizarre image. "Another demon lord." Rigard finally broke the silence, his voice trembling not with fear, but with overwhelming emotion. "To think that our city now houses 3 of the 10 great demon lords as guests. Truly, Lord Rimuru's charisma knows no bounds. His influence even reaches the highest echelons of power. My lord, Do you intend to establish relations with other demon lords? Let's not get ahead of ourselves, Rigurd. I have no intention of collecting demon lords like some kind of game, Rimuru said with a weary sigh, waving his hand dismissively. Dino here just happened. It wasn't planned. He just needed a place to crash, and we happened to be passing by at the right time. That being said, don't hesitate to put him to work. He may be a guest, but as long as he's staying here, he's earning his keep just like any other citizen of Tempest. Understood, Rigurd said with a salute as he stood taller. Work. Dino repeated the word as though it were a curse from the darkest pits of hell. You were really serious about that? I thought it was just a figure of speech. You know, like make yourself at home implies you do the dishes, but you don't actually have to do the dishes. I am very serious, Rimuru replied, crossing his arms. We're building a nation here, and if you're going to be staying here, eating our food, sleeping on our beds, then you have to help out. Especially since it seems like you're not the type of guest who comes and goes, but rather the type to stay over for long periods. Fortunately, I have the perfect job in mind for you. One that even someone like you should be able to handle. Oh yeah? Dino asked, eyeing Rimuru with deep skepticism, one eyebrow raised sluggishly. And what exactly is this perfect job? You're going to be Ramirus' assistant, Rimuru said with a reassuring, yet mischievous smile as he gestured to the small fairy perched on his shoulder. Ha! Ramirus shrieked, buzzing up into the air and hovering nose to nose with Rimuru. Rimuru, are you trying to sabotage my genius? I told you I wanted a team of skilled artisans and researchers, not a lazy sloth who tries to kill people because of some face issues. Dino's more likely to fall asleep than get any actual work done. Don't worry, you'll get exactly what you asked for, Ramirus. Having Dino work for you is just a bonus. He helps out with the various research and development projects that will take place in the labyrinth, and that will be more than enough to earn his keep. Rimuru continued selling the pitch before turning to Dino. As for you, Dino, the job description is pretty simple. You just help out in any way that's needed. I figured this would at least be better than manual labor. It still sounds like work, Dino muttered, before sighing in resignation. But I guess it beats carrying rocks or farming. Fine, but don't complain if I take breaks. Frequent ones. Hey, don't I have any say in this? Ramirus yelled, flying circles around Rimuru's head. I'm sure you can find a way to make it work, Ramirus, Rimuru encouraged her. And if he does get in the way of your important work, you can let me know. His privileges are directly tied to your evaluation of his performance. If he turns out to be more of a hindrance than an asset, then let me know. I'll take away his soft bed and food privileges faster than he can blink. Whoa, hey now, Dino protested, his eyes snapping wide open for the first time since they returned. You can't just mess with a man's sense of security like that, you know? Then don't give Ramirus a reason to report you, Rimuru shot back. Fine, fine. As long as I get to sleep and eat, and the work requires minimal effort, I don't care, Dino said with another lazy wave. Well, I suppose I could try and put up with him, Ramirus said as she folded her arms. While she wasn't completely happy about it, she was willing to try, and that was enough for the time being. Great, Rimuru said before turning to Rigurd, who had been watching his lord manage a demon lord with awe. Rigurd, show Dino around town, and arrange lodgings for him as well. Of course, right away, my lord. Lord Dino, please follow me. Rigurd responded enthusiastically. Dino couldn't help but groan slightly, as though Rigurd's energy was a major deterrent to his entire being. But still, he followed as the Goblin King led him away. As the two walked away, Dino turned his gaze towards Rimuru once more, watching him from the corner of his eye. His gaze lost its fatigue, becoming sharp and focused. While the promise of good food and a soft bed were the main reasons he had agreed to come here, he had one more, which was to watch Rimuru. His resemblance to Veldanava was uncanny, and that made him interesting and worth keeping an eye on in Dino's book. Let's see what you're all about, Dino thought before facing forward and allowing Rigurd to lead him away. With the matter regarding Dino settled for the time being, Rimuru turned his attention back to the remaining two demon lords, as well as Benimaru and Sui, who were still present. The sun was fully up now, casting long shadows along the plaza, and the daily hustle of the city began to resume around them. All right then, with that taken care of, time to get on with the main event. Building the labyrinth, Rimuru said as he dusted off his hands as though he had just finished a major chore. Fortunately, I think I have a good spot to place the door. Ramiris, Malim, follow me. You too, Benimaru, the labyrinth will definitely prove useful for training the troops as well. Understood, my lord. Benimaru responded with a respectful bow, falling into step on Rimuru's right. Finally, Ramiris cheered, doing a little loop-de-loop in the air before settling back on Rimuru's shoulder, barely containing her excitement. I was starting to think we'd spend the whole day babysitting that sloth. Take me to my canvas, Rimuru. I'm ready to wow you all with my masterpiece. Yeah, let's go make the ultimate playground. Malim cheered, pumping a fist into the air, her energy seemingly boundless. Rimuru led the group away from the city center and out of Rimuru City entirely. They soon reached the city outskirts, heading towards a large, open space that had been designated for military exercises. Beyond the cleared fields of the training grounds rose a steep cliff. It was a wall of gray stone that served as a natural barrier to the forest north of the city. Here we are, Rimuru said as they came to a halt at the base of the cliff. He gestured grandly to the wall of rock. What do you think, Ramiris? Is this a suitable canvas for your masterpiece? From what Rimuru understood, all Ramiris needed from him was a surface area to build the gate to her labyrinth, which was basically an interdimensional doorway into an isolated space. From there, Ramiris could create and shape the separate space as she wished, provided she had the energy for it. Ramiris flew off Rimuru's shoulder and inspected the face of the cliff, hand on chin as she looked it up and down. It's certainly strong and steady enough, Ramiris muttered, sounding like a contractor inspecting a building site. She flew back down, hovering right in front of Rimuru with her hands on her hips. But it's a bit plain, isn't it? I expected something with a bit more pizzazz, but I suppose I could make this work. With my genius, I can mold this blank slate however I want. That's the spirit, Rimuru said with a smile. Ideally, I want the entrance here. It's close enough to the capital city for easy access, but specifically adjacent to the military training grounds. That way, Benimaru and the other soldiers can also access the labyrinth for their own training without disrupting their civilian lives. Benimaru nodded, looking at the cliff with a calculating gaze. A wise choice, my lord. If the labyrinth is to be used for combat training, keeping it contained in this sector will allow us to easily monitor and control its access. Right? Rimuru agreed with a nod of his head, before turning towards Ramiris. So, Ramiris, do you need anything else? Nope, Ramiris said as she did a few stretches while hovering in the air. Maybe just tell me if you have a specific design in mind. Depending on how large you want the labyrinth to be, I'll need Malim to provide the energy to sustain it after I'm done building it. Rimuru paused in thought. How about layered floors that are separate from each other? If so, let's start with 10 floors. Mainly for training, research, and maybe one or two other things. 10 floors, huh? Sounds manageable enough. I can handle the creation part on my own, but it will take me a while. I'll be finished by noon tomorrow tops, Ramiris said with a grin and a thumbs up. After that, I'll need a bit of Malim's help maintaining the dungeon, considering 10 floors is a little above my current limit. Got it. In that case, I'll leave you to it. Malim, do you mind staying with her for a bit? Rimuru asked. Sure thing. Leave it to me, Malim chirped, giving her own thumbs up. I'll make sure she's not disturbed, and make sure she doesn't slack off. I'm not going to slack off, and if anyone's going to disturb me, it's you, Ramiris shouted as she attempted to kick Malim's face with her tiny feet, only for Malim to casually dodge her while laughing. Alright, well I've got work to do and so do you. So try not to destroy the area while building this place, Rimuru said as he casually waved his hand. before turning around and beginning to walk away. He could still hear the bickering sounds of the two even as he and Rimuru left, but he had no doubt they would get the job done. More than anything, Malim wanted to duke it out with him in the labyrinth, and Ramiris seemed just as interested and motivated in pursuing her own interests in spirit engineering within the labyrinth. He would naturally have Rimuru set up security measures around the gate, but for now, having Malim there was safer than any guard. At least that's what Rimuru hoped. Labyrinth 10th floor 5 weeks later. A deafening crack of thunder tore through the artificial skies of the labyrinth's 10th floor, followed immediately by multiple shockwaves. Wahahaha! Come on, Rimuru, you can do a lot better than that. Malim laughed joyfully with an excited grin and a manic look in her eyes. She was clearly having the time of her life, though the same could not be said for her opponent. Rimuru, in his human form, was currently engaged in a desperate dance of survival. His body was a blur of black lightning and motion, utilizing his sensory abilities, predictive calculation, and ultra instinct just to perceive the incoming attacks. But more than half the time, that proved to be useless. Malim's movements were just too fast for him to track or even attempt to predict. The worst part was that Malim wasn't even using her full power, not even close, but the level she was operating at was always perfectly calibrated to push Rimuru to the very brink. "You make it sound easy," Rimuru shouted back, his voice strained as he barely managed to deflect a casual punch from Malim, redirecting the force behind the attack using spatial domination. The kinetic energy struck the ground behind him, exploding into a crater the size of a stadium. "It is easy. You just have to hit harder," Malim chirped. She vanished, reappearing instantly above him. Like this. She brought her heel down in a devastating axe kick. Rimuru barely had the time to cross his arms, reinforcing them with his aura and adamantine scales, while also reinforcing his multilayer barrier. Crack! His barriers shattered like glass, and Malim's attack struck true with almost no resistance. The impact drove Rimuru into the floor below with the force of a meteor, burying him deep within the earth. Before he could even register the pain, which was muted thanks to his pain nullification, Malim was already there, her hand glowing with a condensed sphere of blue-white destructive energy. Drago Buster! Malim fired the concentrated sphere of energy, which instantly diffused into a dozen beams of destruction, all of which converged on Rimuru's location. A brilliant light engulfed the 10th floor as a massive, ground-shaking explosion took place. When the light faded and the smoke cleared, all that remained was an enormous, scorching hot crater in what had once been a clear green plain. And yet, Malim remained on guard. A few seconds later, the space to her left distorted, and Rimuru appeared, looking like he had taken a ride in hell and barely made it out in one piece. His clothing was scorched beyond measure, fully exposing his torso and barely covering his lower half. His body was severely injured, the last of his remaining magicules going towards healing his form. "Whoa, you actually managed to survive that," Malim shouted in excitement, clearly impressed despite Rimuru's current condition. Sure, she had held back a lot on her attack, even going as far as to use ordinary magicules rather than her usual, highly condensed stardust. But the fact that he still managed to survive was impressive and worthy of praise. Rimuru, however, thought otherwise. The only reason he had barely managed to survive that attack was thanks in part to a new technique he had learned called distortion field. It was an art that made use of spatial domination to envelope Rimuru's body in a spatial distortion by severing the space around him, nullifying all kinds of attacks. It granted near absolute defense against physical, elemental, and emission-type attacks. Despite this perfect defense, the sheer scale of Malim's attack had forced Rimuru to teleport away from the impact radius. The split focus was when he sustained damage. Had he stayed there any longer, his magicules would have depleted, sustaining the barrier against the attack, and once that happened, it would have been over. "I got lucky, that's all," Rimuru said with a weak grin. Most of his magicules had already been used up during the spar, and whatever remained had been used defending and evading her last attack. He was critically low on energy and barely holding himself together. "All right then, let's keep going," Malim shouted in excitement, completely oblivious to Rimuru's state and fatigue. Milim, why? Rimuru didn't get to finish his sentence, as Milim vanished from her position, appearing in front of him instantly. Her right fist pulled back with a bright pink aura surrounding it. Oh, come on! Crunch! The sound of the impact was sickening. A wet thud that echoed through the vast artificial world of the 10th floor. Rimuru didn't even have time to register the blow. One moment, Milim's fist was a pink blur. The next, his world went dark, his consciousness swiftly snuffed out. Gah! Rimuru's eyes snapped open as he sat up, his hand instinctively coming to his face, where Milim's fist had blown off his head mere seconds ago. He sat there for a moment as he patted himself all over, making sure everything was all right. And sure enough, he was just fine. His body had been fully restored, his magicules replenished, and nothing seemed out of order. Though the phantom sensation of his skull being blown off was not something he wanted, or would ever get used to, no matter how many times it happened. Damn it! Rimuru groaned as he laid back down on the cold stone floor of the resurrection chamber. That's what, 43 times now. It had been 5 weeks since Ramiris had completed the labyrinth, and true to her word, she had built something spectacular. It was a massive structure comprising 10 floors, each of which were a pocket dimension in and of themselves, but all connected by Ramiris authority. The first 5 floors were relatively simple, designed for the general soldiers of Tempest to train freely inside. Rimuru discouraged casually killing for the sake of training, especially since he didn't want his people growing complacent and careless, but that didn't mean they couldn't take advantage of the other various features of the labyrinth, such as Ramiris' ability to freely manipulate and alter the terrain, creating various training scenarios and terrains. Floors 6 through 8 were mainly being used for research and production. Floor 6 is where Ramiris, Vesta, and Dino were teaching the inquisitive residents of Tempest about spirit engineering and magic science. Floor 7 was being used by Lilily and her subordinates to grow various plants that she created, most of which needed a high magical environment to develop. And Floor 8 was being used for growing magisteel or anhipicute herbs. This was done by taking iron ore, which was being mined across the forest and mountains by orcs, ants, and other species, and bringing it here where it could be saturated with magicules. Once the iron ore absorbed enough magicules, it would evolve into magisteel. Floor 9 was where Ramiris had set up her lounge and the resurrection point of this labyrinth. The lounge was mainly used by the demon lords, Rimuru, and occasionally his executives after their own training sessions in the labyrinth. And lastly, the 10th floor, that layer of the labyrinth, was Rimuru and Milim's training ground. The reason it had been placed on the bottom was because Ramiris planned to use the power Milim unleashed during their spars to help fuel the labyrinth. Rimuru took advantage of this when he placed his ore and botany farms on the 8th and 7th floors respectively. It was on this 10th floor that Rimuru had spent the last 5 weeks being systematically murdered by Milim Nava. All right, Sage, give me the progress report, Rimuru thought as he got up from the ground, dusting himself off. Notice: reporting on the individual Rimuru Tempest status following 5 weeks of high-intensity combat training. Magicule capacity has increased by 57%. Physical capabilities including strength, speed, stamina, reaction speed, endurance, and sensory abilities have increased by 108%. Computational power has increased by 320%. Combat efficiency has greatly increased. Proficiency in current techniques, arts, and skills has also greatly increased. Well, when you put it like that, Rimuru thought. He wasn't entirely surprised by the rate of growth he was experiencing. He could literally feel the change within him. And most of the credit for his rapid growth went to Envy, in particular its sub-skill adaptive evolution. Adaptive evolution was a skill that thrived in the face of adversity. It allowed the user's body and spirit to grow based on the challenges presented to them, whether a tough opponent, environmental factors, or even individual training. As long as there was a hurdle to pass, it could bridge the gap much faster and greater than with ordinary training. But his growth wasn't just in the physical and spiritual bodies. His technique and control over his skills had also greatly improved. Where before, the Haze-style sword technique felt like a copied art he'd mastered to perfection, through adaptive evolution, he felt like he was finally taking that borrowed sword style and making it his own. His Ryujin-style martial arts were also improving, being constantly optimized by Sage, but adaptive evolution helped him quickly refine it and make the technique his own. This was taken even further due to the penchant of adaptive evolution occasionally causing the manifestation of new skills, with Rimuru acquiring the extra skill magic aura during his training, a skill that allowed for the seamless integration of physical arts and magic into mystical arts. While Rimuru could already perform mystic arts, acquiring magic aura made the mixing of magic and arts completely natural to him, improving the efficiency of his mystic arts by reducing the overall consumption of energy and stamina by 50%. His control over his skills and magicules had also improved by bounds, reducing his reliance on Great Sage for every little thing. That being said, he still relied on Great Sage for high-level calculations and multitasking his skills, things he was getting better at, but not on the level of Sage. Besides, he just wasn't as knowledgeable, and knowledge wasn't something adaptive evolution could grant him. Though Rimuru had made another big discovery about Great Sage, he occasionally made it a habit to spar against Malim, and his executives occasionally, without the aid of Sage. It was a means to develop self-sufficiency and be able to manage and control his own skills without assistance. He wanted to test his own capabilities without Sage. It was during one of his spars that he attempted something strange. Rather than asking Sage for help, he manually accessed the unique skill Great Sage. The first experience was disorienting to say the least. The sudden flow of information gave Rimuru a migraine so bad it completely disrupted his combat flow. Needless to say, he suffered a very quick and brutal death at the hands of his pink-haired cousin for his folly. After that, he reserved personally managing his skills for when he was sparring with his executives. As it stood, he wasn't able to make full use of the computational power of Great Sage, at least not to the same extent as Sage. Sub-skills such as parallel operation were more mentally taxing than other sub-skills. It felt like tearing his mind apart and trying to look left and right at the same time. But he was improving in other areas. Thought acceleration and analytical appraisal seemed easy enough to manage, as long as he didn't try to process too much information at once. In the last 5 weeks alone, Great Sage's computational power had increased by slightly over 3 times its prior abilities. So far, Rimuru could only access about 40% of this without suffering backlash, and he was slowly improving. Though he had a feeling that even if he could operate on the same level of processing speed as Sage, he would never be as capable as it was when it came to complex calculations. Another benefit of the increased computational power was the reduction in the analysis time of the barriers containing the Chaos Dragon and his mother, the Storm Dragon Velredia. The analysis of the anti-monster barrier containing the Chaos Dragon, which had been originally estimated to take a little over 1.5 years, had been reduced to 5 or 6 months. And the analysis of the unlimited imprisonment holding Velredia, which was originally estimated to take 100 years, had also been greatly reduced to approximately 35 years. Though for the latter, Sage did mention that his mother was occasionally slacking. She'd apparently taken an interest in the various manga stored in his memories and was more or less binge reading them. "Well, I suppose there's really no room to complain," Rimuru muttered as he began to make his way out of the resurrection chamber. The results of his training spoke for themselves, and he doubted he would be able to find someone who pushed him as hard as Malim did. Upon exiting the resurrection chamber, Rimuru made his way to the lounge located on the 9th floor. There he found Malim excitedly recounting their recent battle to an annoyed Ramiris and a sleepy Dino. Trainee was also in the room, standing a respectful distance but clearly ready to be of service at a moment's notice. In the 5 weeks since Ramiris moved here and established the labyrinth, Trainee had taken it upon herself to serve as the Fairy Queen's attendant during her stay. Rimuru didn't really have a problem with this, but he did set a condition that it must not disrupt her duties as manager of the forest and as his advisor, to which she happily agreed. Though he did make it clear that Ramiris was not a permanent resident of Tempest, at least not yet. Ramiris was only here for the duration of his training with Malim, however long that was going to be. And as far as he was concerned, the Dryads were bound to the great forest of Jura, and if Ramiris decided to leave, then they couldn't follow her even if they wanted to. So Rimuru didn't want to get her hopes up. Though, a shrewd part of him did hope that Trainee would get close enough to Ramiris to make her consider staying. "Hey, Rimuru, you're finally awake. Took you long enough," Malim shouted with an excited laugh the moment she spotted him, turning from Ramiris and beckoning him over. With a sigh, Rimuru approached the table and took his own seat, leaning into the couch and getting comfortable. "That was some impressive work today. You almost lasted a whole 30 minutes against me. And you even managed to kind of block my Drago Buster." "Barely," Rimuru corrected dryly, accepting a cool drink from Trainee with a grateful nod. "Just blocking that attack drained whatever power I had left, and if I tried to endure it, then I would have died from it for sure. If he'd been at full strength, he might have been able to endure the attack. Maybe. But even then, there's no doubt it would have drained over 80% of his energy. Evasion was the only option in that kind of scenario. Still, you're pretty amazing, Rimuru," Ramiris praised, hovering in front of him. "Not many people can take a beating from Malim and keep coming back for more. But you don't just come back. You're getting stronger every time. Sounds like torture to me," Dino drawled from his sprawled position on the couch. He wouldn't admit it, but even he was intrigued by Rimuru's growth. He had long since concluded it was the work of a skill. Dino was lazy but not stupid, and he couldn't help but wonder to what extent Rimuru would grow. "All that work and pain. You're a real glutton for punishment, aren't you, Rimuru? You should take a page out of my book and relax once in a while," says the wandering demon lord with no fixed abode. Rimuru scoffed. "If you had half the responsibilities I do, you would realize that peace and relaxation are only afforded to the strong, especially when you have others relying on you." "Fair enough," Dino muttered. "Maybe you and I should spar next time," Rimuru suggested with a smirk. "Wahahaha. That's a great idea, Rimuru. Dino is pretty strong. Not as strong as me, but definitely stronger than you." Malim supported the idea quickly. "Besides, you'll gain more experience by fighting different kinds of opponents." "No way. Ramiris and Vesta already have me doing all kinds of work," Dino quickly rejected. "Oh? And here I was about to suggest you could take the day off on the days we sparred," Rimuru said casually, trying and failing to hide the smirk on his face. The statement had the intended effect, as Dino's attention was captured. The deal was too good to pass up. All he had to do was kick Rimuru's ass for a few minutes, kill him, and then he could slack off for the rest of the day. The downside was that he would have to actually exert himself for those few minutes. Just because Rimuru couldn't beat him, that didn't mean he was easy to kill. He'd managed to last 30 minutes against Malim after all. Just thinking of the effort it would take caused Dino to shudder. "For the record, I know what you did there," Dino said with a sigh as he sat up. "And?" Rimuru asked with a smirk. He already knew the answer. "I'll do it. If kicking your ass for 1 hour gets me a free pass for 23 hours, then I'm all in," Dino said with a lazy but confident smirk of his own. "Haha, that's great. With Dino's help, you'll evolve in no time," Malim shouted as she patted Rimuru harshly on the back, causing him to nearly spill his drink. Though he didn't think much of it as he was more focused on what Malim said. "Evolve? What are you talking about, Malim?" Rimuru asked in curiosity. "Oh yeah, you're about to evolve into a dragon lord," Malim excitedly revealed with a thumbs up. "Trust me, I know a lot about dragons, and you're reaching your limits as an elemental dragon, so it's only a matter of time until you evolve. Isn't that great? If anything, it's strange that you haven't evolved into one already. Most dragon lords are S-rank threats by human standards and are comparable to demon lord seeds like Fry and Carrion in terms of raw power. Those that live long enough, gaining intelligence and experience, grow to rival even fully awakened demon lords," Dino said as he looked at Rimuru as though he were an anomaly. "Well, from what I can tell, I am a unique monster of sorts. Most likely as a result of my lineage, my evolution requirements are much higher than that of ordinary dragons," Rimuru explained as he nodded his head. The last time he had evolved was shortly after coming to this world and getting named by his mother. Since then, He had devoured many beasts in the forest, numerous dragons while training in Kanat, and even devoured a spatial dragon lord and an orc disaster. And yet, he still hadn't met the requirements to become a dragon lord. Though if Malim said he was close, then he believed her. That would definitely explain it. I mean, you're already as strong or stronger than Carrion and Fry, Malim said as she nodded along. It's scary to think just how much stronger you'll get if you evolve. Or worse, if you become a demon lord, Ramiris said as she shuddered. The closest she could think of was Malim, who was also the child of a true dragon. Thankfully, Rimuru wasn't as childish or wild as Malim was. Well, whatever the case, I'll keep training with that goal in mind, Rimuru said with a determined nod. Evolving would allow him to grow several times stronger in a single moment. Lord Rimuru. Just as Rimuru was about to continue, a sudden thought transmission came from Sui. His urgent tone immediately made Rimuru tense as he put his drink down. Sui, what is it? Rimuru asked mentally. There's been an incident in the plaza, Sui started. Rimuru City Plaza a few minutes ago. The commotion in the central plaza of Rimuru City began abruptly, disrupting the daily life of the residents of the City of Monsters. The source of the disturbance was a group of beastmen who had casually entered the city with an air of unearned superiority. Leading them was a lean beastfolk with short, spiky black hair, feline gold eyes, and a black tail protruding from his lower back. He was dressed in a sleeveless black tunic, white, loose-fitting pants and boots, typical of a warrior. This was Phobio, the black leopard Fong, and one of the 3 beastketeers that served under the beast master Carrion. He was escorted by 4 other beast folks. Phobio and his companions stopped in the center of the paved streets, eyes scanning his surroundings with a mixture of disdain and genuine surprise. He had come to this forest expecting to see a primitive village of goblins or other weak monsters, something barely worth calling a settlement. Instead, he saw paved roads, complex wooden structures that rivaled human craftsmanship, and an organized water system. But what surprised him most was the diversity of powerful monsters. He saw hobgoblins, high orcs, dragonauts, naiads, Kijin, and other powerful races all happily going about their daily lives. It was a melting pot of species that had no business working together, and yet here they were, functioning as a cohesive society. What the hell am I looking at? Phobio asked, feeling slightly frustrated that these lowly monsters were actually leading better lives than the average Eurazanian. I thought this was supposed to be a nation of monsters? This almost looks like a human city. His subordinates, each high-ranking lycanthropes in their own right, couldn't help but nod their heads in agreement. And they also couldn't help but stay on guard due to the number of high-ranking monsters casually walking around. Still, Phobio paused as he watched a high orc carrying a beam of timber while casually laughing and talking with a hobgoblin. To organize a bunch of monsters to this extent, whoever rules this place must have some capability. Phobio muttered as a new plan began to formulate in his mind. Phobio then turned towards a nearby hobgoblin merchant. Hey, you there. Where is the master of this place? Tell him envoys of the beast master Carrion have arrived. He should come and kneel before us immediately. The goblin merchant flinched but stood his ground, a sign of the pride instilled in them by Rimuru after a lifetime of being at the bottom of the food chain. I'm sorry, but our lord is currently away. If you wish to speak with him, you should try requesting an audience at the administrative building. Requesting an audience? Phobio repeated, his voice dripping with incredulity. You expect me, Phobio the black leopard Fong, to wait in line like a commoner? Know your place, you filthy goblin. With a growl, Phobio raised his clawed hand and swiftly swung it down, intent on teaching this pathetic monster a lesson. The goblin flinched but didn't run, shutting his eyes as he braced himself for the inevitable pain. Please hold your hand. The voice that spoke was soft yet firm, melodic yet demanding attention. It cut through the thick tension in the plaza like a knife through butter. Phobio's hand froze mid-swing, inches away from the goblin's face. He turned towards the source of the voice and watched in interest as a crowd of monsters parted seamlessly, respectfully bowing their heads as a group approached from the direction of the administrative building. At the forefront was a Kijin of breathtaking beauty. Her long pink hair swayed gently with her movements. Her fair skin glowed in the sunlight, and her crimson gaze was fixed upon him with an intense focus. Two small, white horns protruded from her forehead, marking her race. She wore a pristine white kimono with red accents, her hands resting gracefully in front of her. Flanking her was another Kijin with purple hair and a single, larger, black horn. She wore a suit that barely contained her curves, and her eyes glared at him with the promise of violence. Behind them marched a unit of the Royal Guard in their black uniforms with purple linings, their discipline evident in how they stood ready to act at a moment's notice. Fobio's eyes narrowed as he watched the approaching group. Kijin? And high-level ones at that. Shuna stopped a few meters from Fobio and his beastfolk subordinates. She had received word from Sui that a group of intruders had managed to avoid patrol and make their way into the city. Seeing as Rimuru was still in the labyrinth, she decided to greet their guests herself. "I am Shuna Tempest, Queen of the Rimuru Tempest Federation." She introduced herself, her gaze shifting to the goblin merchant for a moment to check for injuries before shifting back towards Fobio. "In my husband's absence, I serve as his representative. How may I be of assistance to the envoys of Beast Master Carrion?" Shuna asked as she flared her own aura. In the time since she had married Rimuru and taken the Tempest name, the soul corridor between her and Rimuru had grown much deeper than when she had been initially named. As a result, her power had also grown, creating a rather intense pressure for those in her immediate proximity when she unleashed her aura. Fobio noticed this and couldn't help but acknowledge the power she wielded. He eyed Shuna up and down. She definitely had the looks, mannerisms, and strength to be the queen of this monster town. The other Kijin and the rest of the guard weren't bad either. They would easily give his subordinates a hard time. Despite this, Fobio still believed they held the upper hand in terms of strength and negotiating power. "So you're the queen of this monster town, huh?" Fobio asked, his tone switching from outright aggression to haughty arrogance. "I am Fobio the Black Leopard Fong, and one of the 3 Beastketeers that serve under the Demon Lord Carrion. I must say, this is quite a nice town that you have here. It's certainly more advanced than I'd expect from a bunch of monsters." "Thank you. Our nation has only managed to flourish in such a short time because of our lord, Rimuru Tempest. It is he who made this possible," Shuna said with a polite smile. "It is impressive for a stray magen," Fobio reluctantly admitted, causing Cheyenne to growl at the insult towards Rimuru. However, Shuna raised her hand to keep her from acting. "That said, this town and its people deserve a far more competent lord and protector. Fortunately, Lord Carrion is a generous lord. He is willing to take this nation under his wing and grant it his protection, as long as you all swear loyalty to him. You should all be grateful." Silence filled the plaza as the surrounding monsters looked at Fobio in indignation. To them, who had just been unified under a single banner by the son of the Storm Dragon, swearing fealty to another being was the farthest thing from their minds. "Why you dare?" Cheyenne growled as she reached for her blade and took a step forward, only for Shuna to stop her again with a raised hand, and reluctantly, the purple-haired Kijin stood down. "I appreciate Lord Carrion's concerns for our nation's safety," Shuna began, remaining ever the picture of serenity. Her voice was polite but carried a sharp, icy tone. "However, the Rimuru Tempest Federation already has a guardian and lord. My husband, Rimuru Tempest, is more than capable of protecting his people. We have no need for another master, nor do we intend to bow our heads to anyone else. Please convey our refusal to Lord Carrion." The rejection hit Fobio's pride like a physical slap. His face contorted in rage, malice leaking from him and directing itself squarely at Shuna. How dare you refuse Lord Carrion's generosity? You're nothing but a filthy monster." Fobio kicked off the ground faster than the eye could follow, the paved street cracking slightly as he charged towards Shuna in a blur of movement. A fiery aura enveloped his right claw as he brought it towards Shuna, aiming to teach her a swift and valuable lesson about true power. Shuna didn't flinch. Her expression remained calm. If anything, her gaze held disappointment, which was far worse in Phobio's eyes. She had already seen through his movements thanks to the predictive calculation of her unique skill, analyst. She could have easily dodged and countered the attack. But she didn't need to. Boom! A loud shockwave shook the plaza, and a second later, the figure of Phobio shot out of the dust cloud that had formed at the point of contact. His body tore through the concrete floor before crashing into one of the nearby buildings. Filthy beast! The dust cloud cleared to reveal Cheyenne standing protectively in front of Shuna, her right fist stretched out. Her face was a reflection of fury and unfiltered rage. You will not lay a hand on Lady Shuna while I draw breath. Sir Phobio! The other 4 lycanthropes reached for their weapons to support their leader. But before they could even take a step forward, they suddenly found themselves surrounded on all sides by members of the Royal Guard, their weapons drawn and ready to cut them down should they make any false moves. The sound of coughing and wheezing could be heard as Phobio pulled himself out of the rubble of the wooden building. Before he could take another step, the light in front of him was suddenly blocked. He looked up to see Cheyenne standing in front of him, glaring down at him with eerie, glowing violet eyes, her large blade resting casually above her shoulder. What the hell? One punch and I feel like I've lost all the strength in my body. What kind of monster is she? Phobio wondered as he glared at her. He had known she was strong, but that level of physical prowess was insane. Perhaps if he was in his beast mode, he might have been able to match her, but even then, it would be a gamble at best. That one strike told him that she was strong, and he had barely even seen her move. For all he knew, she could have more power that she was holding back. Besides, it wasn't just his life on the line. Looking past Cheyenne and towards his subordinates, he saw them encircled by the Royal Guard. Each guard possessed an aura that rivaled, and in some cases surpassed, that of his own subordinates. Their postures and intensity were clear marks of the rigorous training they had been put through, each one of them ready to act should the beast folk make any sudden movements. And then there was the queen herself. Phobio had sensed her aura earlier on when she flared it, but in his own arrogance, he had failed to accurately read how strong she was. She stood there watching the unfolding scene with a disappointed frown. Her aura was dense, refined, and wrapped around her like a protective mantle. It was vastly different from the dark, violent aura Cheyenne projected, but no less terrifying. It became clear to Phobio that attacking her would have ended just as badly had Cheyenne not intervened. Phobio swallowed the copper taste of blood in his mouth as his eyes darted between the fuming Cheyenne, the disciplined royal guards, and finally settling back on Shuna. The arrogance that had blinded him before was quickly tempered by the reality of his current situation. He had miscalculated. Badly. He had been sent by Lord Carrion to take a look at the budding nation within Jura, along with another specific task, but he had ended up getting too full of himself and took matters into his own hands. He had assumed he could easily subdue these monsters, and then Lord Carrion would no doubt praise and reward him. But it was clear that this nation had powerful monsters that could go toe-to-toe with even the 3 Beasketeers. "Stand down!" Phobio shouted, his voice rough and strained as he spat a glob of blood onto the pavement. His subordinates hesitated, looking between their battered leader and the warriors surrounding them. Even Cheyenne seemed a bit surprised by the order, but she still didn't let her guard down. "I said stand down," Phobio roared, his eyes flashing. "That's an order." Reluctantly, the other beastfolk lowered their weapons before dropping them to the ground altogether. They raised their hands in surrender, eyeing the surrounding monsters warily. Phobio slowly stood up, and Cheyenne tensed as he did, her grip on her blade tightening as she watched him rise to his feet. "I yield," Phobio stated, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. He looked Shuna dead in the eye. "This transgression was mine and mine alone. If you must punish someone, let it be me. My men were simply following my orders. Spare them." Cheyenne scoffed, her voice sharp and decisive. "You think an apology is enough? After you dared to attack Lady Shuna? Death is the only way to atone for such an insult." Cheyenne declared as she raised her blade slightly, fully prepared to slice the biscuiteer in two. That's enough, Cheyenne, Shuna said calmly. But Lady Shuna, I said enough. Shuna's voice did not rise, but the sharpness and authority behind it was enough to make Cheyenne freeze. The purple-haired Kijin lowered her weapon and stepped back, though she continued to glare daggers at Phobio. Shuna walked forward, moving past Cheyenne to stand before the defeated black leopard Fong. Her expression was unreadable, her crimson eyes cool and calculating. Your loyalty to your men is commendable, Sir Phobio. It is perhaps the only redeeming quality you have shown today, Shuna stated with a small, approving smile, which quickly turned into a frown. However, I cannot simply let you go. You attacked a sovereign ruler in her own capital. That is an act of war, regardless of your intentions. Phobio stiffened but didn't argue. He was well aware of the situation he had put himself and his men in. They had no room to negotiate. Take them into custody, Shuna commanded the guards. Do not harm them further, but ensure they are disarmed and confined. They are to be treated as prisoners of high status, not common criminals. Yes, Your Majesty, the guards collectively shouted as they moved to immediately disarm and bind the beast folk with anti-magic cuffs. These had been designed by Rimuru and Kaijin using the same properties as Shizue's mask. In fact, the masks Rimuru had given to Sui had served as a sort of prototype for developing these restraints. These cuffs fully suppressed one's magicules, preventing them from releasing internal power or absorbing and channeling magicules from the environment. Phobio and the beast folk were restrained with no resistance, their hands bound. Phobio looked towards Shuna one last time as he was pushed forward. What will happen to us? That is not for me to decide, Shuna replied. Lord Rimuru, my husband and the ruler of this nation, will be the one to determine your fate upon his return. Until then, you shall remain our guests, albeit confined ones. I see, Phobio said. A part of him couldn't help but be nervous. Seeing how powerful the queen and the royal guards were, he couldn't help but wonder what kind of monster was powerful enough to rule over them, and to think he had angered such a beast. However, Shuna paused, glancing back at Phobio, a small, unreadable smile playing on her lips. I wouldn't worry too much. We have no desire to anger or start a war with Beastmaster Carrion. As long as you don't cause any more trouble, your lives will not be in danger. With that, Shuna signaled for the guards to take them away. Rimuru City Administrative Building. It only took minutes after receiving news of what had happened before Rimuru was out of the labyrinth and back in Tempest. He didn't waste a single second, ignoring the startled goblins and elves and making a beeline for his office where he could sense her. He pushed the door open, his usual calm demeanor replaced by a rare look of urgent concern. Shuna! Rimuru burst into the office, his eyes scanning the room before immediately landing on his wife. He found her sitting on the couch, calmly sipping a cup of tea as though she hadn't just had an encounter with one of the top subordinates of a demon lord. She looked perfectly fine, her clothes untouched and her skin unblemished. Rimuru! Shuna set her cup down, a look of mild surprise on her face as she stood up. You're back sooner than I expected. Sui told me what happened, Rimuru said, crossing the distance between them in a few strides. He took her arms in his hands, looking her over once more. Are you okay? Shuna's expression softened, a warm flush dusting her cheeks at his open concern. She pulled her arms back and took his hands in her own. I'm perfectly fine, Rimuru. Cheyenne stepped in before he could touch me, and even if she hadn't, I was more than prepared to defend myself. I'm sure, Rimuru said as he let out a breath he hadn't realized he had been holding. I know that you're strong and that you can handle yourself, but that doesn't mean I won't worry. I know, and I appreciate your concern. Truly, Shuna said softly, bringing one hand up to his cheek while the other remained intertwined with his. But as your queen, I cannot show weakness when our home and people are threatened. They are just as much my responsibility as they are yours. Rimuru couldn't help the swell of pride and affection that warmed his chest. It had been just over 2 weeks since Shuna had returned from the city of the Forgotten Dragons, and since her return, she had seemed a lot more confident and stronger than when he last saw her. When asked what had caused the sudden change, Shuna had merely stated that it was a surprise, one that Rimuru had yet to learn today. But he wasn't complaining. In fact, he found this courageous and daring side of her rather attractive. "You're right. Something I'm learning is that surprises are becoming a constant around here," Rimuru said with a scoff, while Shuna giggled. "From what I heard, you were amazing. Thank you for protecting our home." Rimuru gave her arms one last squeeze, his expression shifting from a worried spouse to that of a ruler. While Shuna may have handled the situation perfectly, that didn't excuse the actions of Phobio and his men. "Now then," Rimuru said, turning towards the door where Cheyenne was waiting outside, "let's go see what our guests want." A few minutes later, the atmosphere in the council room was suffocatingly heavy. Rimuru sat at the head of the table, his posture relaxed and his aura suppressed. Yet despite that, there was an undeniable pressure coming from him. Shuna sat to his right, ever the epitome of elegance and grace, and yet one could not deny the sharpness in her eyes. Next to her was Benimaru, his supreme commander, the displeasure on his face at the news of the events quite apparent. To Rimuru's left sat Keed and Akatsuki, two of his trusted advisors, their expressions equally stern and unyielding given the circumstances. After a moment, the door to the council room opened, and Cheyenne entered. Following closely behind were Phobio and the other beastmen, each escorted by a royal guard. The black leopard Fong looked much better than Cheyenne had left him, his rapid regeneration having healed almost all his wounds. His eyes still held a spark of defiance, but he knew better than to act up now. Phobio was the only beastman permitted to sit, taking a seat at the opposite side of the long table, directly facing Rimuru, while the rest of his subordinates stood behind him warily. Just as Rimuru opened his mouth to speak, the doors to the council room slammed open with a resounding bang. "Rimuru, you cheater! You left without me!" A blur of pink shot into the room, a smaller golden light glued to the collar of her attire. Malim Nava burst into the room, coming to a halt beside Rimuru's chair, pouting childishly with her hands on her hips. Ram Iris seemed to be holding on for dear life on Malim's collar, looking completely disheveled from what must have been a terrifying ride. "Malim, huff, you really should try slowing down once in a while," Ram Iris wheezed as she immediately fixed her ruined hair and straightened her attire. "I told you to hold on tighter," Malim argued back, ignoring the room full of stunned occupants. Those from Tempest were used to Malim's sudden visits and her busting down their doors, but the Beastketeers were beyond shocked. Besides, Rimuru sensed trouble, and I smelled a fight. Phobio, who had been trying to maintain a sense of dignity and pride despite his circumstances, suddenly felt a wave of dread and anxiety. His eyes nervously locked onto the petite, pink-haired girl standing next to the ruler of this nation. He recognized the demon lord Malim Nava. Of course he did. Malim frequently visited Eurazania, not as much as Fulbrosia, but enough that she was acquainted with Carrion's high-ranking Magen. "Lady, Malim?" Phobio managed to ask. What was the destroyer doing here? Had she already claimed this country and its people as her own? There were so many questions going through Phobio's mind. Malim blinked, turning to look at Phobio, who had called out to her. Her eyes instantly widened in recognition. "Oh hey, you're one of Carrion's lackeys? Phobio or something, right? And don't forget about me, the great demon lord Ramiris," the fairy shouted, zipping right into Phobio's face, causing the lycanthrope to lean back. "You better show some respect. We're the guests of honor in this place." Phobio felt himself begin to sweat a whole lot more than 5 minutes ago. The situation had just gotten a lot more complicated. He had come to the city expecting to find a bunch of lowly monsters and Magen. But the monsters were a lot stronger than he had anticipated, the leaders among them even more so. And their ruler, Rimuru, Phobio's senses told him he wouldn't stand a chance against someone like him. Now he was learning that 2 of the 10 great demon lords were casually hanging around as guests in this place. Phobio just didn't know if he could handle any more surprises today. Rimuru sighed and rubbed his temples, Shuna giggling beside him while the rest of his subordinates seemed amused. This had become normal to them at this point, which was kind of concerning. Malim, Ramiris, take a seat. We're in the middle of a rather serious discussion right now, Rimuru said, his tone carrying enough weight to make even the boisterous Malim pause. Oh, right. I knew that, Malim said, quickly zipping over to an empty chair and sitting down with an exaggerated poise, trying to look dignified. Ramiris floated over and sat on the armrest of Malim's chair, crossing her arms and legs, and nodding along as if she were part of the jury. With the chaotic duo settled, Rimuru turned his gaze back to Phobio. The black leopard looked like he was having a very bad day. Now then, my name is Rimuru Tempest, leader of the Jura Tempest Federation. So, Phobio, why don't you tell me exactly why you're here? And be honest, I'll know if you're not. Phobio swallowed hard, his throat suddenly feeling dry. Looking at the individuals gathered in the room, he knew that all the monsters present were strong enough to be worthy of respect before he turned his gaze back towards Rimuru. There was no point in lying. Not only would Rimuru be able to see through it, but so would Malim. Lord Carrion sent us, Phobio began. We were ordered to investigate the recent happenings of the forest, the disappearance of the storm dragon, and the rise of a new nation of monsters within the great forest of Jura. The news of the orc disaster's defeat was enough to catch Lord Carrion's attention, and he wished to know more about the monster that brought about its defeat, and those that followed him. But you did more than just investigate, Akatsuki stated, his eyes narrowing. You actively antagonized and then attacked our people, all in an attempt. And no, those actions were my own. I thought I could earn Lord Carrion's favor by presenting this nation to him, Phobio admitted, his head low as humiliation burned within him. He couldn't bring himself to look anyone in the eye right now. I expected primitive monsters. Spit it out, Rimuru demanded, slightly irritated. Lord Carrion took an interest in the wolf-like beasts that participated in the orc war. The ones that wielded lightning and wind. I was asked to recruit them into the Beast Master's army. Rimuru's eyes narrowed further, his irritation shifting to annoyance. Recruit them? You mean steal my subordinates? Lord Carrion believes in strength, Phobio said, trying to find some of his earlier conviction. He believed such a powerful beast would be better suited serving the Beast Master. Is that so? Rimuru asked, his voice deceptively calm. He leaned back into his seat and crossed his arms. Very well then, let's hear what Ranga has to say about that. Ranga. At his call, the shadows beneath Rimuru's chair elongated, stretching behind him. From the inky darkness, a massive snout emerged, followed by a head crowned with two horns, and a mane that crackled with black lightning. Ranga rose from the shadows, his full size filling the room with an oppressive presence. His massive form towered over everyone in the room, a low growl rumbling and vibrating through the walls. He turned towards Rimuru, his head bowed slightly. You called, Master? Ranga's deep voice reverberated within the room. Ranga, this person seems to have something he wants to say to you. Please hear him out, Rimuru said, casually gesturing towards Phobio. Understood. Ranga turned towards Phobio and the Beastketeers, his true size easily overshadowing them. A low growl came from him as his eyes bored down on the lycanthropes. My master has ordered me to hear what you have to say. Speak. I'm listening. The other beastfolk couldn't help but flinch and take a step back in the face of Ranga's menace. But Phobio remained surprisingly unaffected. If anything, he seemed impressed and intrigued by Ranga. Phobio stood up from his seat and approached Ranga slowly. Magnificent. I can see why Lord Carrion took such an interest in you and your kin. You possess incredible power, and your eyes possess a keen intellect beyond that of the average beast. Phobio genuinely praised as he looked at Ranga. My name is Phobio, and I serve the Beast Master, Lord Carrion. Are you suggesting I betray my master for another? Ranga growled. Surely whatever loyalty you have towards this Majin is not so absolute? Phobio spoke up, his words causing Ranga to growl louder and bare his fangs. And yet, Phobio continued. Lord Carrion is the king of beasts, the lord of all lycanthropes and beast kind. Serving him is the highest honor for a beast of your caliber. Question my loyalty to my master again. I dare you? Ranga snarled, black lightning crackling around his mane in what was meant to be a clear threat. Phobio wisely chose to stay quiet. My loyalty is not some shackle to be broken, nor a contract to be bought. Lord Rimuru granted me a name, granted me the power your master craves, and saved my pack from ruin. Ranga lowered his massive head until he was eye level with Phobio. He is the only one worthy of my fangs. Speak of betrayal again, and I will tear your throat out. Phobio stood frozen as Ranga pulled his head back. Sweat trickled down his brow, the beast's golden eyes fixed on him with a glare that would have killed a normal person 10 times over. The pressure coming from Ranga had increased with his rage, becoming something not even Phobio could ignore. There was no point in attempting to persuade the wolf. I see, Phobio stammered, stepping back and returning to his seat. With a huff, Ranga turned back towards Rimuru, shrinking back down to his smaller size. Without another word, he sank into Rimuru's shadow once more, wanting to get out of the same room as Phobio before he did something that would inconvenience his master. Rimuru watched the exchange with a satisfied expression, though his eyes remained cold as they settled back on Phobio. Now that we've settled that, Rimuru said as he leaned forward, his fingers interlaced on the table. Let's review your actions, shall we? You entered my country uninvited. You insulted and tried to attack my people. You attempted to poach my subordinates. And, most unforgivably, you attacked my wife. At the mention of the attack, Malim, who had managed to get her hands on some croissants, stopped eating. Her playful demeanor vanished instantly, replaced by a terrifying expression that did not belong on a child's face. He attacked Shuna? Malim asked, her voice quiet but carrying a dangerous edge. Malim liked Shuna a lot. She was nice, gave Malim tasty snacks, and even convinced Midray to start eating real food. Sure, she could be a bit strict and scary sometimes, but she was still one of Malim's favorite people. The fact that she was married to Rimuru, her cousin, practically made them family. Rimuru, Malim stated as she looked at Phobio as though he were nothing more than a bug she was deciding whether to squash. Can I blow him up? Just a little bit? Like, maybe just his legs? No blowing up people in the conference room, Malim, Rimuru said, his voice calm but firm, dousing the explosive tension of the pink-haired demon lord. Why not? Malim asked as she slammed her hand on the table. He's being a jerk, and he tried to attack Shuna. I know that, Rimuru shot back sharply, perhaps a bit sharper than he intended to. With a sigh, he turned back towards Phobio and his companions. I'd rather avoid having a bad relationship with Demon Lord Carrion over the foolish actions of one of his subordinates. His aggression was of his own doing, not the will of Carrion. Rimuru gestured to the guards. Release them. The guards undid the anti-magic cuffs on the other lycanthropes. Phobio looked at Rimuru in confusion. You're letting us go? After everything? I am, Rimuru confirmed. But don't mistake my mercy for forgiveness. What you did here can only be described as a transgression against my country, my people, and my family. Rimuru's eyes began to glow eerily as they bored into Phobio's. I meant what I said by not wanting a bad relationship with Carrion and Eurazania. But before any relationship can be established, I expect an apology. Not only that, but tell Carrion he owes me for sparing your lives. Phobio nodded his head slowly. He understood what was happening. Rimuru was sparing them to gain political leverage over Carrion. And it was Phobio's actions that had put Eurazania in such a disadvantageous position. Phobio stared at Rimuru for a moment. He had been mistaken in thinking this place only had primitives. Clearly, they were all powerful and intelligent monsters, Rimuru especially. He didn't know the true extent of the nation's power, but the people in this room alone were strong enough to rival Eurazania's strongest. and he had a feeling only Lord Carrion would be able to fight Rimuru. "I will deliver your message, Lord Rimuru," Phobio said with a nod. He would definitely get into a lot of trouble, but it was a hole he had dug for himself. "Good," Rimuru said as he leaned back into his seat, crossing his arms. He turned towards Cheyenne. "I'm done with them. Escort them out of the city. Right away." And with that, Phobio and his companions were escorted out of the room by Cheyenne and the royal guards. Rimuru would have Sui assign some personnel to tail them in the shadows until they crossed the forest's borders for insurance. Once the doors to the room were closed, Rimuru let out a sigh as he relaxed into his seat, the tension finally leaving him. Was that wise, my lord? To just let him go like that after everything he did? Akatsuki asked, a frown on his face. It may be perceived as weak. Perhaps, but killing Phobio would have forced Carrion's hand, Keat countered. There was no way he would sit idly by after we killed one of his subordinates, even if Phobio was in the wrong. He has his own reputation as a demon lord to consider, after all. That's right. Besides, if Phobio's words are to be believed, then there's a chance Carrion may not have meant any ill will towards us, Rimuru said. While he wanted to be optimistic, he had to also be realistic. Regardless of how things turned out, Phobio had been sent to gather information about his nation. What Carrion was going to do with that information was the real question. Either way, best to stay on alert. I'll have Trainee and Sui keep a closer eye on the borders to Eurazania. Boo! Malim cried out as she slumped onto her chair with a dramatic groan. You should have let me punch him at least once. You let him off way too easily, Rimuru. Not everybody loves to solve their problems with their fists, Malim, Ramiris countered. Besides, if you hit him, you probably would have killed him and destroyed half this room in the process. Whatever the case, he's gone now, Rimuru interjected before another argument could start between the two demon lords. All we can do is hope for the best and prepare for the worst. Right. As the room began to clear out, Rimuru remained seated for a moment longer. He had managed to defuse the situation with Phobio today, but he still didn't know what the true intentions of Carrion were. Fortunately, he doubted the Beastmaster would do anything stupid once Phobio informed him of Malim's presence here. Things were developing a lot faster than he had thought. He would have to increase his training with Malim some more. He couldn't rely on her presence in Tempest forever.